and we will pass that information right along to you. One other thing to let you know about, recently, there's been some issues on Roebuck Road with speeding, and my office contacted the Sheriff's Department. They've put out extra patrols, and what we've learned is they have been citing people on Roebuck Road. Last I heard, over 40 citations in the last few weeks. So if you drive that road, be careful. They're going to be out there. I'm sure everybody's following the rules, but if you're not, you put on notice now. With that, that's my report for today, and I thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Do you want me to take any questions?
Sure.
Do you have any questions for me?
Commissioner Weiss?
What's that?
Yes, Marvin Fairtag, Windsor H. For years,
A little closer to the mic, please.
we were being told that the state and possibly the county were looking into a sound deadening along the turnpike on our property on the west side. I see at other century villages like Boca, they have that, and different on Military Road, etc. Some of the newer construction over there. So can you tell us if you're involved in that and what the status of that is?
Okay, great. That's a great question. So the work that was done on Military Trail and the work on the Turnpike is done by FDOT, the Florida Department of Transportation, and they make the determination of where and when they'll put up a sound wall. Now, as you know, right now they are widening the Turnpike. So they're not going to do anything to put up any kind of sound barriers if they're going to be widening an area, because obviously if they put it up, it's going to have to come down. At this point, I have not heard of anything in specific as to sound barriers going up, but I will be happy to check into it and report back to your board.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, this is consistent with what we have heard in the past, that no action would be taken on these sound walls unless the turnpike was to be widened. And so there's no real change there. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything else? Have a great day. We're here. Call us if we can help you.
All right, we have the quorum numbers. There are 195 signed-in delegates. Marvelous turnout. How many slips have been turned in? Zero. You have any? Sir? No. Okay. So theoretically, we are still at 195. I think before we chew up any more time, we should get to the principal business of this assembly, because of the potential for debate. You never know how long that's going to take, so I'm going to bring up Anita. And we have one or two bylaws. Two, yeah. Yeah, please.
Oops. Okay, thank you. The first bylaw on budgeted reserves has already been discussed at length, but there's more, particularly because it was left kind of neutrally by Sebastian. We have two. Let's start with that one, and that is budgeted reserves. I think Sebastian did a good job of explaining. Certainly he knows more about it than I do, but for us lay people, essentially the difference is that budgeted reserves, also known as straight line reserves, are separate accounts for each planned expenditure, and pooled reserves, which we have now and which the petition hopes to change, is one account with everything laid out and specified, but money can be moved from one to another in pooled and not in budgeted or designated. So I'm going to read it. I think that makes most sense. I will read the petition. It was submitted by Ed Grossman. It had more than adequate signatures that were vetted, And I think the best thing is to read it and then have more discussion, send it over for a motion, and we'll go from there. It's Article 9, Committees, Section H3, Finance Committee, as proposed. UCO's budgeted reserves shall be designated by specific categories and shall be funded and recorded by such categories and recorded on UCO's books and records, each in a separate numbered account. Each such designated account may be spent up to, but no more, than the amount funded at that time. The designated account expenditures are restricted to their designated use. Any expenditure for any other reason other than the designated use or for any amount in excess of its current funded balance is restricted. Any non-compliance with a designated account restriction must be approved at a properly announced delegate assembly by a majority vote of the delegates. Let me just say that supporters believe, this is a summary of what we heard as it went through the process from advisory to officers and executive board, and supporters believe that budgeted reserves would add transparency, more transparency. Opponents believe that adding many more accounts under reserves is unnecessary for transparency and would complicate budget approval. By the way, this is in your packet if you want to follow along. It's third page in. I should have told you that up front. As it turned out, the advisory committee voted 6 in favor. Officers and executive board voted unanimously against. So there should be some interesting continued discussion on this. I'll move it over to David to call for a motion and then have discussion.
All right, do we have a motion on this bylaw amendment? Please remember, 2/3 are required.
Oh, yes, the 2/3 is 130 out of 195.
Very good, you saved us the arithmetic. Ed, you're moving this motion? Okay, and do we have? Who's the second?
Joyce Reese.
Joyce Reese is the second. Any further discussion? We've had quite a bit of discussion on this.
Oh, we have somebody
Yeah, come on.
comment, 2 people.
Richard?
Richard Handelsman, Plymouth 5. I would just like to bring up 3 concerns: transparency, interest, and quorum. Transparency. I spoke with Mr. Sebastian's associate at the UCO office, where he is Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 1 every week. I went to the Finance Committee town hall meetings on the budget 3 times where they were. He reports here, and I know personally since that discussion on Tuesday, I emailed his associate 15 times and got more information. There is already, I believe, sufficient transparency in the process. As far as interest goes, when Sebastian was hired, UCO was getting $950 a year in interest. By combining the accounts, he left BB&T, went to Seacoast, and is now getting 1.78% interest, $2,000 a month rather than $950 a year. And as Sebastian mentioned, the Fed Reserve just lowered the rates, but we're still getting a great interest on a pooled reserves that can be withdrawn at any time. The last one was a quorum. It has been mentioned that we would get more power, but there comes a limit to how many times you want to vote on every little bit of item that might go over a line item. And I think about, what if there's a sinkhole and we go over the line item, for example, for clearing out the debris, and then there's not a quorum? This could happen again and again. There are already 12 line items in the budget, from roads down to laundry. Each one of those line items can be discussed with Sebastian or his associates at UCO or an email. So it's not a bad idea to go to specified line items, but it is micromanaging. You lose money, and if there's not a quorum, what do? Thank you.
All right, I understand we have no timer, but please, oh, we do. I'm sorry. I take that back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jean.
Jean Dowling, Salisbury, I just wanted to make a couple quick statements to try to get people to understand what the difference is. One is, even though they have designated categories, when you go over the category, they can dip into another category to get the number of or the amount of money they need. That's with the pooled reserves. With the other reserves, it's the same thing, where you have categories, but you can't go over that without your approval, and that's the important thing. You have lost the approval to change monies. In the beginning, with the pooled reserves, or with any of them, you do vote for the amount of money expenditures in the budget, but that's all you get to do. If there are any changes or anything later, they're not brought to the delegates. They can be changed without your approval. So my problem is, we have lost some of our powers by the pooled budget, and that's why I'm against it.
Good afternoon. Hello again. We could go on and on. Mr. Handelsman, I just want to review something with you which is not exactly on target, but if you remember and you have a good memory, 6 years ago I recommended putting the money in the T-bills, not this year. 2, I don't know for sure, but Anita's here. I had looked through the bylaws. I haven't seen anything in the bylaws that says that if you change a line item, you have to get approval by the delegate assemblies. If that was in there, I wouldn't have brought this motion up. I'm sorry Sebastian left, but we all know what happened before. Money was taken, over $3 million. It never came to the delegate assembly. This clears it up. It's up to you. Vote for the designated reserves.
Okay, to answer your question, what's in the bylaws is a line item veto in the new bylaws coming up, but it does not specify in the bylaws that everything that needs to be changed goes to the delegates. You're correct.
What's in the bylaws has nothing to do with the reserves. In order for it to come and change a number, it has to come to the delegates. And Mr. Handelsman, we need delegates. That's why we're here. Saying it's a job, that's not an answer. Vote for the designated reserves.
Anything else? Do we want to call the vote, David?
Sure. Is Marilyn ready?
Yes, she is.
We're ready. All right. Click, click, click.
A little lecture on how to do this.
Oh, okay.
Click your magic clicker, Froggy. Whoa.
This gentleman wants to know, does anybody have a problem with the clicker or need to know how to use it? I think you know it's 1 for yes and 2 for no. You're welcome.
Ready? No.
Yeah.
Getting close. You always got a couple that gotta vote.
That's not bad.
184.
Has everybody voted who intends to vote? Okay, we're still getting votes. Still getting. Surprised. In the back, have you picked up any flyers? No. One? Okay. One. All right. Going. All right. Bring it up, Marilyn. All right. However, it is certainly not 2/3. So it's an interesting motion, but it does not carry. All right. All right. Make sure we save the graphic. Makes the minutes a lot simpler. All right. Moving right along. Go ahead. Anita?
Yes.
Yeah.
The second one, also on your sheet in the packet, is for roll call vote for all bylaw-related amendments. Anything to do with the bylaws, a voice vote. Let me read it. It's simple, and you can, then we'll have some discussion. Article 12 Amendment, Section C2, as proposed. All votes by the delegate assembly with regard to the approval or disapproval of any proposed change to a UCO bylaw after it has been voted on by the officers committee, the executive board, and the executive board shall only be conducted by a roll call vote by each of the delegates in attendance at the delegate assembly. A roll call defined. Each delegate in attendance at the assembly, his name will be called and his or her vote recorded in a roll. This roll will be a public record and will be available to every unit owner. Again, on this one was submitted by Ed Grossman. Signatures were vetted. They were adequate and correct. Supporters believe that delegates should be accountable to unit owners for their individual votes. Opponents believe that delegates might be discouraged from voting if their name and votes were published, and that voice roll calls would add too much time to delegate assemblies. The advisory committee voted unanimously in favor. Officers voted unanimously against, and the executive board voted 9-6 against with 2 abstentions. So that's the vote. Dave, do you want to call for a motion?
All right, may we have a motion on this one? Roll call vote for bylaw changes. Richard, you're moving this motion? You do, to accept the motion. Do we have a second? Betty Bleckman seconds the motion. Discussion on roll call vote.
I got one question. Do the clickers have the ability to tell which person did what. And,
All right.
And if it does, that's your public record.
All right, let me answer your question. And we gave this a lot of thought when we got the clickers. Each clicker is numbered. And with some additional software, we could, they'd have to work like crazy out front at sign-in, equate the clicker number to the individual. And I said, no, Americans do not like to be tracked in their voting habits, that this will end up being a big mistake. So while the technical answer is yes, it's not something we're doing. Okay? This is about, look, you've all seen the big tote board in Congress. I'd hate to tell you what that would cost. And we could do that. The name of the congressman and how he voted. All right? That's the principal objection here. You have a lot of delegates who they don't want it seen how they vote. There's a real issue here that you're all going to have to work in your own mind whether you want to do this. All right?
The reason I asked this question is if this passes, and they do want a roll call vote, I propose that you would get the software and save the time, because you know how long it's going to take to have everybody come up here.
But remember now, you're always going to have the concern. Every single vote is going to be recorded and trackable in the system. And I don't really think you want to do that. If you think on it, you're thinking now in terms of this one issue, and roll call vote answers that issue, right? But if we put in the system to track everything, people will be concerned. There's no doubt I would be concerned if I knew that every vote was being recorded in the computer. All right. Olga.
When a petition for a bylaw comes to the delegates, it's not just any simple item. It's a very important thing, because changing the bylaws is a big deal. When you have a roll call, you may know who was voting, but David says you don't want to be known. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? I'm a Democrat. I'm going to vote as a Democrat. What's the big deal if I advertise it? If you don't have a roll call, you have people raising their hands, and you have sloppy counts, which are not accurate generally. So having a roll call is not a big deal for a very important issue. I want you to seriously think about that and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Richard Handelsman, still from Plymouth 5. I don't know about sloppiness if we use the clickers, but that is not my point. I agree with the idea, but not with the implementation. Last week, after the executive board meeting, with permission from Ava Rachinsky, I, accompanied by a security guard, unlocked the door, came down. I sat in the 10th row, middle seat. He timed me in an empty auditorium where you can hear your name called without any knees, legs, or thighs to clamber over. I went from the middle seat to the aisle to the mic, announced my vote, waited for it to be recorded, waited for the recording to be checked, went back to that seat. He timed me 1 minute, 31 seconds. That's a minute and a half for me, alone, silent, and fairly mobile. The minimum quorum is 117 delegates. You do the math. Thank you.
Steve Seftenberg, East Hampton A.
You kind of dragged that out, Doc, but okay. Fair enough. We have, yes, sir.
there's enough dissension in some of these associations already. Believe me, if the choice was between expressing my voice and not doing it, I would not do it. If it was recorded and everyone could say, oh,
Yeah.
Steve did this, Steve did that. I don't vote on something until I get the an impression of what my 24 owners have, and they have to trust me, and they do. So I can't. I'm sorry. I don't want
No, understood.
anybody in the world know how I voted on that.
Yeah, there's a number of distinct sides on this one. Ed?
Thank you very much.
Good morning again. I note for the first time that the advisory committee 100% approved this particular bylaw. Now, we talk about time. Those of us who have been around for a long time know that we've had in the past this kind of vote without electronics. It went very easily. You don't have one person up here. And we've had roll call votes in the past. And the bylaw committee has spent years and thousands of dollars to revise the bylaws. Now, you're not going to wind up with 26 bylaws at one delegate assembly. Those of you who feel that you can't stand up and express your vote, which is for your association, I don't know if you really know what the job of a delegate is. Your job is to express the opinion of your association. And in Congress, everybody gets up and votes. And you, as a citizen, knows who votes for what. This is an important issue. Why wouldn't you want to know if your representative is actually following what you want? And I think it's incumbent on every single delegate to help and be expressive, and the time we've done it many, many times, it goes very efficiently. So I urge you, vote for a roll call vote.
Marilyn Gordetza, Camden, D as in David. I believe that most of us here